First of all, I just wonder how you began to get interested in the research. How did you start?
Okay, well, that's an interesting question. I think I started in my last year as a school teacher. I was working in Hong Kong. I was head of English in an international school, and I was given a day a week to look at some aspect of teaching. And what I chose to do was look at the way students argued in 2 or 3 different subjects. And that very small study was very interesting. It meant that I talked to students, to teachers, to try and understand how to argue well in the school curriculum. And soon after, when I left school teaching in Hong Kong to come back to England to a university post at the University of Hull, I began to research this for my own PhD in a little more depth. So I started my interest in research first as a school teacher, then I went on to do a PhD myself in argumentation as written by 11 and 12-year-olds, and it is from there that I began to apply for research grants a bit later and got much more interested in larger scale research projects.
Can you tell me about more aspects of argumentation? Which aspect of argumentation you are specialized in particular?
Yeah, sure. Well, I started with a particular interest in school argumentation. That is, how do 11 to 18-year-olds develop their ability to argue? But when I applied to the Leverhulme Trust in the UK for grants to fund that research, we were looking particularly at the changeover from school to higher education. So that first research project for which I won grant funding was really looking at students moving from school up to university, to the first year of university, and what happened to their writing, to their thinking, to their argumentation as they made that shift. And it was that project combined with another one that I won around that time from a different funding body, which that one was much more focused on school teachers and how they helped students in their argument, and that led to a book called Teaching and Learning Argument, which again looked at school and higher education argumentation. Maybe I could say a little bit more just about what argumentation is. I mean, it's the ability to put ideas together in a logical sequence, and crucially also to underpin those ideas with evidence. So that skill, though that sounds quite simple, it's one of the higher order skills that school children and certainly university students and postgraduates have to develop, whatever level they're working at. So it's as important to writing a PhD as it is to writing an essay at school level.
Are you using the research now, or are you using the research in your own teaching?
Yeah, very much. I mean, I've always felt throughout my whole career, at university level certainly, that one's own research feeds in to one's teaching. I was drawing on my own current research in order to inform my teaching. But I think one of the great things about the Institute of Education is that right through the Institute we bring researchers and top-level researchers together with their ability to teach and together with teaching, so that our students enjoy not only being taught but being sharing the research that lecturers are undertaking and being part of that.
So one of your research interests is about e-learning theory in research methodology.
That's right.
Would you say some more details about it?
Yes, I will. Well, e-learning and e-learning theory and e-learning methodology comes for me from the mid-1990s or so, when the internet began to become much more available to people in education. And both schools and universities were thinking, how do we use it? How can we best maximize our use of it to help students learn better? But I'm really interested in the theories behind what kinds of learning take place in e-learning. So let me give a specific example of how I became really interested in e-learning in higher education. It was through actually people like you, Sun Young, and other research students who are working in the field of e-learning and, in your case, second language learning, who were asking questions: how do I research online learning? You know, how can I capture and investigate that kind of learning? So this made me think, well, firstly, methodologically, we've got to think of new ways of trying to get hold of this particular problem. Some of the old ways, the old research methods like interview, questionnaire, and so on, are very, very valuable and can be used. But at the same time, capturing the incidence of the number of times someone visits a website, or looking at their practices as they move from screen to paper, perhaps to reading a book and so on. All these sort of different practices, for me, began to make me think, first of all, okay, we need to work out how to improve methodology and methods to capture that. But secondly, theoretically, what kind of learning is going on here, and is it different to, shall we say, conventional learning?
So, how would you briefly explain, if you have someone who have no idea about reframing theory and literacy in front of you, what would you say?
How would I explain it?
Yeah.
Well, in terms of communication, broad communication, I include speech, writing, movement like dance, and other forms of communication. I think that all the time, every time any communication like that takes place, it is framed. And let me give an example of what we're doing now. You and I are having a conversation. It's being filmed. So there's a particular kind of frame around what we're doing. It takes place for a certain amount of time, and in it we understand the conventions of what we're doing, and so we communicate in that particular way. If you take another example, if a child, let's say a 5-year-old child in a classroom, is asked to tell a story about what happened in their family at the weekend, and then write a story about it, we need to think about how is that framed. First of all, they are in school, they are in a classroom, a teacher is, so they're in a particular educational frame, and they're being asked to tell a story that is in speech to their friends, to the teacher, about something they did at the weekend. So they're having to reframe something that happened at the weekend as a narrative or as a story, and tell it to their friends and to their teacher. And then the teacher asks them, could you take this one stage further? Could you remake or recreate your told story in writing? And so the child will write the story. Then they might at a later point add an image or some pictures or photographs, and then it might be displayed on the wall of the classroom. So all the time the communication is being given new meaning by being reframed in different stages along the way. And I think that's absolutely central to what goes on in classrooms, and indeed what goes on in lecture theatres and seminars at higher education. All the time we're being asked to rethink, reframe the way we look at things, and to use a range of modes, speech, writing, the visual, and so on, in order to make meaning and convey it to other people.
So how does it relate to the other aspect of your research? I mean, the research methodology in e-learning and also reframing theory, and does it relate to each other in some ways?
Yeah, well, the act of framing, which is quite a creative thing to do for the maker as well as the reader of any kind of text, is for me operating at, shall we say, a mezzanine level, or halfway up the level of theory. Higher up, theoretically, it links for me into the theory of rhetoric, which is the arts of discourse, the arts of communication. And that's the top level idea, top level theory for me that informs a lot of my other work on argumentation, for example, or on writing development, because rhetoric for me looks at not only the text itself, and that text can be, again, let me say, made up of images, words, and other things, but it's also about what are the contexts within which that text is being made, and what are the contexts in which it's being read. And those contexts include not only one's individual history and interests, but one's social positioning, and also the political and power issues around composition and around writing and so on.
Thank you very much indeed for your interview today.
Thank you, Sonia, for interviewing me so thoroughly and so nicely.